So okay, so like you see on the agenda there, my name's Tony Rucci, and I'm the director of data center for the Reno data center for NJVC down in Reno, and I also run critical infrastructure protection. So this is a little bit out of my realm of what I do this day and age, but in my previous life, before I retired, I was a counterintelligence agent for about 21 years, and spent a little bit of time up there in the White House. So that's a little bit what I want to talk about today. It was kind of timely with this conference, and that's part of why I submitted this talk in addition to another. But 9/11 is something that is going to remain with all of us throughout our adult lives, and we're going to pass that on. But a lot of the younger generation now, it's already passing them by. They don't even know what 9/11 was, except for what they see in the news and everybody else's speculation. So I do want to give you a little bit of a warning that this is all my perspective. These are the events as I saw them and as I was engaged that day. I was with the First Lady, and so if you ask 10 people in a room, who was involved from the staff that day, and if you talk to each one of them, you're going to get 9 or possibly even 10 different perspectives on any given event. So does everybody remember what they were doing when they got word of the attacks that day? It's going to kind of live in our generation as kind of the Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Attacks. Everybody remembers that moment in life. So, with that said, so here's a little bit about my background and the time that I served and suffered. And I hope you guys don't mind if I roam a little bit, because that's just what I do. But I was there at the White House from 1998 to 2004. Kind of came in at the very tail end of the Monica Lewinsky investigation under the Clinton administration, and left about halfway through Bush 43 administration. It's a 2-year assignment, and do the math, right? So it's two-year assignment, but if you kind of gravitate to that role or something like that, they keep you around. And I was active duty military. I was a warrant officer agent, and there are a lot of folks there who spend their entire careers in the military assigned to the White House. There are 2,300 military members who are assigned to the White House Military Office. It's an umbrella organization that supports 15 different organizations under the White House. You're familiar with some of them, some of the more popular ones. Marine One, Air Force One, the White House Mess, the guys who are the chefs and the valets, ironing the president's underwear and socks and things like that. And it's actually a hard job to recruit those guys because their perception in the Navy ranks, and all of them are Navy, in the Navy ranks, their perception is that they have to clean the toilets for the White House, and that's somebody else's job. That's a subcontractor. But so I worked in the White House Security Office. I was a counterintelligence operations officer, and I also worked technical policy oversight. I tracked early in my career as a computer crimes investigator, and so as soon as you have any kind of a technical or a zeros and ones flavor in your background, they threw you in the technical policy. And back then, when I came in there in '98. That's about the time that we're all migrating to these little things we call personal electronic devices, and it was all the it wasn't even an iPhone, and it wasn't a lot of cell phones and Blackberries and things like that. It was the PEDs, and it was the little iPacs and things like that, and the Palm Pilot, and everything was associated. Everything was called a Palm Pilot. If you had anything that was a handheld device, it was a Palm Pilot. So helping write some of that policy, and it was kind of comical throughout the community because people were scared to death of them. Now they're all going, "Hey, can I bring this inside your secure facility?" But I spent a lot of time on trips working advance and working the threat package, and I travel all over the world, 71 trips, as you can see, to 94 countries. So you learn how to say hello, goodbye, and thank you in a lot of different languages, and that's kind of the door to open to get any kind of business done. I'll share that a little bit. So that was one of the privileges. You got to travel a lot of places that you'd probably never travel in your life. So that was probably one of our neat little privileges that we got to share. Of course, the Wall of China, then out in Panmunjom, the demilitarized zone. And this is kind of interesting here because as you're standing in that little hut in there, it's about the size of this room. There's a yellow line drawn right across it. So we're all walking across, and nobody warned us that you can't walk across that line. As soon as you do, this guy from North Korea bangs on the window, and it looks like he does that quite a bit because he had a big old silver on his hand. So I think they get a lot of tours there on his watch, but it's kind of comical. And of course, one of our privileges back home was that you got to go to the Kennedy Center whenever the president wasn't using the presidential box. You could put your name on a little rotation list. So a lot of neat little privileges that come along with the duties, but a lot of responsibility as well. And so here's how our office was broken up. I don't mean to stand right in somebody's way here, but here's how our office was broken out in an organization chart. We had personnel security, industrial security, information security, and the aspects of the counterintelligence and technical security. So I wore a couple of these hats right here in that piece of it. So we would always send somebody on a trip and work with Secret Service and work in that threat development and work the host nation threat. But we'd also travel quite a bit inside the continental United States whenever there's a lot of foreign presence for the Olympics and things like that, where you had a lot of foreign nationals that were going to be involved in the trip. So this was our true mission statement as it was back in 2004 when I left. And up front, just to let you know, I'm not giving you any kind of super secret stuff that's not already out there. Well, maybe a little bit. I got a couple pictures. Maybe we'll turn the camera off, block it out just for a second. So that was our mission statement there. It was really force protection and security of the traveling staff and the senior staff in the presidency. It was really not a Democratic or Republican position. It was apolitical, and you're really working for the office as opposed to the person. So when administrations changed, employees in the Secret Service and the White House Military Office didn't necessarily change unless they were the directors in those respective organizations. So a lot of people have the misperception that when you work at the White House, this is what everybody's office looks like. And it's not, hey, you get to go in there every now and again when they were out of town, and you can go in there and sneak pictures like this. But this is really what my office looked like. So it's pretty sexy, And if you knocked on that, that was good old hard steel desk in there. And not a lot of decoration there. I'd sneak my little UT Vols stickers on there. But anyway, so it wasn't as sexy as you might think. We did have some pretty nice communications gear. We had White House Communications Agency for all of our infrastructure and technology assets out there. So we had 19 simultaneous trip sites that we would support on any given day around the world and inside the continental United States. Those guys in White House Communications Agency, I don't know if you've ever met any of those guys. They do a lot of really great work with a lot of legacy technology. We've never experienced any kind of legacy technology in our world, I'm sure, in the IT world. But we used to have a saying. We'd say, "Waka, yesterday's technology, tomorrow," and it was the kind of thing because they were using a lot of analog devices to be able to support the President of the United States. And you'd scratch your head when you see it the first time. You see a lot of these road boxes there, and you pop that open, and there's servers in there, and that ends up being a comm center inside that little box, and you're going, "Wow!" And then you open up another box, and you see breadboards, and they're punching down, telco blocks in there. Running telcoded room. You say, you got to be kidding me. We've got to be digitized. Well, in some instances, you are. We used we call it counterintelligence human automated tool sets for our services, and really it was just nothing more than. Well, I'd hold up my little laptop right here, and it was really about as powerful as my laptop was. You had a regular old laptop in there with some secure devices on it, but it had a big old battery that would sustain you for about half the time that my iPad or my Mac does now, and you had to always constantly plug them in. But we did have some communications where we could use an MRSAT and talk from wherever we were, and Iridium phones, and I'll talk to you a little bit how valuable Iridium phones were on that day. So here you go. Here's one of those secrets I'm gonna divulge to you. A lot of people want to know what's going on underneath the White House. They hear about all these shelters and everything like that. So all right, you can cover it up or you can not cover it up. We'll go public with it. All right, no, but I'm just kidding. We'll go public. All right, there you go. So there's a bunch of it's just a public room there. Yeah, it's all the rooms that you go on the public tours in the White House. I'm not really gonna give you many secrets except for this one right here. Inside the Secret Service, the Joint Operations Center in there, where they're monitoring all the assets. So anybody have any kind of IT rooms and you run any kind of Knox or SOX in your spaces out there, what's one of the big no-nos inside of your computer rooms? Well, number one, he gets the. There you go. So look at here. They got. They don't have Starbucks cups over there, but they got little White House logos on them. They got White House M&Ms, water. Yeah, I think they are. They probably are. It says POTUS is and that's the password is FLOTUS. And then this one way over here on the right, you see that? That's a big no-no. A stapler on the, yeah. No, I'm sorry, there's a 9mm sitting over there. Yeah, yeah, we don't allow staplers in there, damn it. Yeah. No, it's it's just a little bit of comedy there, if you knew my sense of humor. So one of the indicators for whenever the president's inside residence, you'd always know that there's a Marine security guard standing out there in front of the West Wing. And those guys are really sharp, and they're all well beyond any kind of regulations of fit. They had to have about a waist that's about that big around, and they had to just look super strat in their uniform, just like the guys who were guarding the Tomb of the Unknown. They're the best of the best, and those guys are really on top of it. And that was just one of the ways that you could tell that the president was in residence. And there's snipers all around there all the time, somewhere. But, you know, they're probably a little more vigilant when POTUS is in town. So the rest of the time they're playing cards up there, doing crossword puzzles. Sir. Oh, continental United States. Sorry, and Oconus outside the continental United States. Sorry, I should explain each one of them. I try to make my slides abbreviated so I don't leave a lot of text on there, but I should spell it out, and I'll do that for the next one. So this is the time, like I said, that I was there from '98 to 2004 through the first half, or the last half of Clinton and the first half of Bush. And so there was the people in charge on the paper, but really the people who were in charge, everything kind of revolved around the pets in the White House, and it seemed like they get a lot more publicity than everybody else. And I put the dogs in there because Barney and Spotty get a little bit of press on 9/11. So as I explained in the front of my talk, was that my role on 9/11 was a little bit different than it probably had been in any other day in that administration. I don't generally support, or I didn't generally support, the First Lady. It was always really in a presidential role or a vice presidential role wherever they were going to travel. But everybody just stepped up and you did something that was out of your box that day. If you were asked, you didn't say no. That just wasn't part of the equation. But I learned a lot about her that day and learned to respect her a lot more than I had ever imagined that I could for a First Lady. And I'll share a little bit about that. So we're all very familiar with what took place that day and the events around it. And just to kind of refresh your memory, the events were really circling around 4 flights. The American Airlines Flight 11, 175 for United, and then 77 and Flight 93. And 93 is the last flight to take off that morning. So I'm going to kind of run down the timeline and talk about president and vice president's roles and the first lady's role, and then kind of my actions are in red captured down here. So I won't bore you too much with a lot of text, but so as was the case in most days, the president was down in on a trip, and he happened to be in Sarasota, Florida, getting ready to speak with a class, an elementary school class. He was going to read some books with them and spend some time in that kind of less diplomatic role that day. Ended up being one of the most diplomatic roles that he had to encounter in his administration. But while he was going out for a nice leisurely run, the rest of us who were working there, we were finishing up our 2-hour commutes in the Beltway. I lived up in Frederick, Maryland, up north of Frederick, Maryland, so my commute was 2 hours each day, each way. So you spent 4 hours on a good day without any kind of traffic accidents if you were in town and not traveling. So I got to look at a whole bunch of red lights on my way to work. So at about 8:45 is when Flight 11 struck the North Tower, and everybody was speculating, well, maybe it was some crazy pilot who fell asleep or something like that. They didn't have it on autopilot, so really nobody was really up in arms on the public sector yet. I was on the phone with a guy named Brad Weber, who was head of our technical surveillance, the guys who would sweep rooms for listening devices and emplace them if you were in offensive capacity. But in our role, we were always defensive and protective. And so Brad and I were talking about an upcoming trip, and then he said, wow, you watched that on CNN? And I didn't have TV on, so I clicked it on real quick, and we were watching this, and all of a sudden everybody's going live. And then the next thing, Mrs. Bush, in the meantime, she was en route to the Capitol, and she was to speak to the House that morning, and she was going to have a meeting with Senator Kennedy ahead of time and talked about they were going to get their story together and probably put together their little presentation before they briefed the House. And she was briefed ahead of time that the first plane had hit, and as she arrived, the second plane It had struck the South Tower up there. All bets were off. Everybody knew what was going on. It was a very targeted attack, and things started rolling into gear. We have very directed action plans and prepared action plans in any kind of hostile event. So chaos was going on in the hallways, and I heard a lot of commotion outside of my office suite out there. And so I walked out there, and I ran into this guy who was Anthony Scafidi, and he was one of the directors. He's a colonel in the Air Force for our, we called it PPR, plans, programs, plans, and requirements. And they really worked a lot of these kind of emergency action events is what they were always planning for. He looked over at me, he says, Chief, he says, you need to go in there and call the NMCC, National Military Command Center. And in the meantime, he's saying, you need to call NMCC and get an air cap over there. I never had any kind of plans to get an air cap, and I said, no, I'm not really sure what that's going to involve. I knew that anytime we called somebody like that, we were going to have to authenticate, and I was pulling out my authentication card. Anyway, at the same time that was going on, that's when Secretary Card, who was the Chief of Staff of the President, interrupted his meeting with the kids and whispered over his shoulder that if the second plane hit attack, we're under attack. Or he said the United States is under attack. And that's when, if you ever watch any of the video footage, President Bush, all of a sudden his whole demeanor changed. His face got very serious. He didn't want to jump up and execute his mission. He wanted to make sure that he was being, exuding a calm posture for the children, and let them know that he's in charge, and that he knew that they were going to find out about it later on. More importantly, anytime the president's in a room, and if he were talking to a group like this, even if it were a small group, right behind everybody would be the reporters. And so you have a whole crew of reporters back there, and they're all up on podiums, and all of a sudden he sees their phones and pagers buzzing and going off. So they're getting the same information that he just received moments ago. So now he knew that he was on public stage, and all the cameras were oriented on him, and he needed to exude that presence of leadership instead of wigging out like I would have done. So I called the Military Command Center for air cap, just a couple of fighters over the White House. That's all. And so I called them up, and I told the guy exactly what was going on, and they already knew. And it says, requesting air cap. We need whatever you guys are going to provide over the White House. We needed surveillance over the White House for security. He said, Roger that. Got it. Click. I got my card ready to go, and I'm ready to authenticate. And there's a whole process for that. And I was kind of blindsided. And like 3 minutes later, there are two fighters flying around the White House up there. I'm going, wow, I did that. And I was thinking, now I'm an insider's kind of threat guy. I'm a security guy, and I'm thinking, man, I got this. But that's something that came out months later as we kind of ran down the whole lessons learned of what could we have done better, what could anybody have done better, what did we do right, what did we do wrong. And, yes, sir. They were armed, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And they were followed up with armed as soon as they were able to get. I mean, it's really a lot of it is show of force type of, and it was they were en route and turned. Hey, bank left. Why? Just shut up and turn left. Yeah. So, all right, let's continue on the timeline. About 9/18 is when, after that directed attack, that second directed attack, it was like, all right, let's start evacuating. So they started evacuating the Capitol and the White House at that time, because there were reports that were all flying around saying the White House is under imminent threat, the Capitol, any kind of national archive in the Washington, D.C. area was under attack. And we had also heard that DIA over Bowling Air Force Base had been attacked as well. So there was lots of chatter coming on the radios at that time. And so as we started evacuating our staff out of the East Wing and the new executive office building and the old executive office building out there as well, I happened to have 10 Iridium phones because we would take them with us on travel, because some of these places we traveled to, we didn't necessarily have any kind of secure comms. So everybody's familiar with what an Iridium phone is. It's just a satellite phone. It has a little secure card in here, and we have our own operator that we go through, and then we can patch secure calls through it. Well, during that time, the whole cell networks had become saturated, so you couldn't pick up a phone and call anybody and let anybody know that you were okay at that time. Now there were phone boxes around, and you had, believe it or not, you had some regular old phone systems out there, and AT&T and Ma Bell, whoever it was out there at the time, you could get in and throw a quarter in the phone. But if you had a cell phone, you weren't gonna get through to anybody. These right here were working great. We were rock stars. Secret Service was grabbing them from us. Hey, we need to borrow one of your phones. So we distributed them out to my guys, and we were able to communicate back with the POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is downstairs in the basement of the White House. It's where our guys were kind of running command and control down there. About that time, President Bush was preparing to address the nation from the elementary school, and everybody really expected that he was going to, or the kids, I'm sure, were the ones who were expecting that he was going to, do this little closing speech and thank all of them for having him out there that day. Then he dropped the bomb on the nation, and the kids all had that look of surprise in their face because they had no idea really what was going on. They were pretty sheltered from it, but the public knew what was going on. So I had gone out outside of the grounds now, outside of the 18 acres, and we began building, pushing out everybody and evacuating all the buildings around the White House and around the 18 acres, as we called it, outside the security perimeter, and was pushing them out as far as we could. Everybody was coming out of the buildings, and all the way out to 19th Street, which is out there by World Bank. And so businesses were just leaving their doors open, and they were running out, and there was security out in the streets. But very quickly, the streets started becoming little ghost towns out there as the envelope began pushing out further and further. And Secret Service went and grabbed Vice President Cheney out of the West Wing and evacuated him, the National Security Advisor, and some of the other key staff downstairs into the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. And this is my boss right here, Jeff Thompson. He'll come into play in just a little bit. So as we're standing out there, we're on 19th Street. There's a lot of speculation that there was never a plane that hit the Pentagon out there. And you can listen to the conspiracy theorists who say that there was never a plane. I'll tell you what, I watched that plane fly at rocket speed right at building top level, and I thought it was going to the World Bank, is where I thought it was hitting. But you could hear it just screaming, and I thought it was a fighter jet, and you looked out there, and it was this big monster jet coming down there, and then it went out of sight, and then a few seconds later you heard it impact over the Pentagon. And then, of course, more speculation was coming out that other sites were being hit around D.C., which were all false. So right after the impact, I was called back into the POC, and they said, all right, we need you to link up with the First Lady. She's going into a safe house. And I said, well, how am I going to get around there? All the streets are blocked off, and I can't just go, be bopping up, running down the street. So they got me in a Secret Service vehicle, and it was almost surreal because the streets were a complete ghost town at that time, and we were ripping up Pennsylvania Avenue and heading up towards the Capitol to go link up with her, and we were probably going 120 miles an hour. And I was thinking, man, if I can only do this, without getting bust. You can't go anywhere in D.C. If you've ever been who's driven downtown D.C. or tried to drive downtown D.C., right? It's always, you go about from here to that projector, and that's about as far as you can go at any given time. So it was really just one of those moments you say, wow, this will never happen again. Vice President at that time was down there, and one of the call-outs came from the air cap that was following and chasing the plane that was going out to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. They said, hey, we've got an unidentified aircraft. They're not responsive, and they're heading towards the White House, and it's an imminent threat. They're coming to Washington, D.C., and they're going to hit the White House. And the request was, can we engage this commercial aircraft? And so Jeff Thompson, right here in that picture, my boss, had asked Vice President Cheney. He engaged the president, and the answer was weapons free. And well, I'm kind of getting emotional on that because that's one of those things that you're getting ready to take out civilians' lives, and that's the kind of emotional thing just to even kind of run through your head. The moral and ethics thing, and the pilots really had a hard time, as they'll relay later on in their life, that was a really tough decision for them to actually get that response. Wow, I didn't realize I'd. Whoa. So I could link up with probably the strongest person that day, and link up with the First Lady. and she's already down in the safe house at the time, and she's in a little conference room. It's about this size, and she's got TV and some drinks and everything set up in there, and a non-alcoholic drinks. She's drinking water, but she's being taken care of. And we've got Ron Sprinkle and Nick Trotta from Secret Service, and Dr. Bill Lang, who's the deputy director of the White House medical unit at the time, are down there. And right about that time is when the South Tower collapsed, and it had only been 56 minutes since the impact on that one, and so that was a really emotional time. And then all of a sudden, you know, these evacuation plans start accelerating, and that's when Flight 93 crashed in before anybody could execute on the weapons-free order that was given. So at that time, First Lady pulls me aside and she asks me and Nick Trotta. Nick was head of her protective detail at the time, and said, here's what I want. I want some Blackhawks, and I want to fly to my next evacuation point, and here's all the staff. And she gives me a piece of paper, a yellow piece of paper. Here's all my staff that I want to bring with me. And one of those challenging questions was, we'll work on it, ma'am, and we go over there and go talk to Nick and Ron. And the challenge was, there's a designated evacuation plan for the president and the vice president. Spouses are kind of ad hoc. We don't, you know. So the plan for the vice president, as you know, it's open source now. The vice president's plan was that he was going to drive in a motorcade to an offsite. All aircraft now, as you remember, were grounded, and we weren't flying any kind of helicopters around, which are slow movers versus fixed wing. And so vice president was even going to roll out in a motorcade. So if you think the vice president was rolling, do you think she was going to get 6 Blackhawks to fly? So I got the nice honor of going in and telling her she wasn't getting aircraft. And then I blocked my neck as she tried punching me in it. No, but I mean, it was understood. And she said, okay, well, what's the plan? And so we went through the plan, and the plan was going to be, if we had to evacuate, it was going to motorcade. And shortly after that is when the North Tower collapsed. So this is where it gets kind of good. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit downer on this point, but there is a little bit of humor in all kinds of tragedy. And so at that point, the president had already evacuated Sarasota, and he started heading west. Wanted to get him as far away from Washington, D.C. as he could. He, of course, wanted to go straight to D.C. I need to get home. I need to show that I'm in charge and I'm not going to be run off. Secret Service had other plans, and they trumped him for a little while, and was able to get him out of there. So he landed at Barksdale Air Force Base. And First Lady was told that, okay, we're going to start working an evacuation package for you. You need to get some things together, and expect to be gone for a few days. So she sent Andy and Andy Ball, which was her chief of staff, and John Myers back there. And she says, oh, by the way, get the dogs and the kitty for me while you're there. There's only 2 living members that were above White House grounds at that time, and they were in charge of the nation, were Spotty, Barney, and Kitty. And so they grabbed them up in carriers and brought them back. And the first thing that she does is she starts putting them on a leash, and she starts coming out the door. As she finally got them, she walked out the door. I said, "Man, what are you doing?" She says, "Oh, I've got to go take the babies out to go walk." You can't go outside and go walk. You know, everybody's in a state of chaos, and they're going to see you, and they're going to know where you're at. Number one, call it a hiding place for nothing, for some reason, right? So I said, I got it. So I took the dogs and I walked around the corner, and just around the corner in the hallway, beautiful carpet. It probably cost more than my house. And it was thick, and I'm pretty sure it was, can we cover that camera? I'm probably, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. It was nice, and it was Persian probably, and it was really absorbent too, by the way. So walk around there and stand there with the dogs on a leash and said, come on, do your thing. And they did. They went piddle and walked around, and she said, did they go? And I said, mission accomplished. She said, oh, thank you. And they walked in, and I was like, you know, so everybody said, so what did you do on 9/11? I walked the dogs. And then I turned to the uniformed Secret Service guy, and I said, we need to get somebody to clean that up, because that's probably going to stain. I don't know. I'd love to see that dry cleaning bill. And that's about that time is when President Bush addressed the nation from Barksdale, and it was a short speech, just kind of letting everybody know that we're going to retaliate, and we're going to get him back to. He says, I'm on my way back to to Washington, D.C. Well, he wasn't. He was heading out to Offutt at that time. Sir? Uh-huh. But, yeah, what? Yeah. Well, so, you know, Air Force One is the call sign for whatever fixed-wing aircraft the president's on. And so when they took off from Sarasota, nobody else was in the air at the time, so they only had, all the air traffic controllers in the world only had one aircraft they were worried about. But they weren't calling themselves Air Force One. It was just, you know, hey, what's the flight plan? And they're going, hey, he doesn't have a flight plan. We'll just do handoffs, you know, as he's rotating across the country. And, well, who are we handing off to? Well, you'll find out at the time. So it's just kind of, guys, just go with it. So Mark Tillman, Colonel Mark Tillman was the pilot at the time, and he was having a, you know, he was going as fast as that thing would go. If the wings would have bowed back, he would have probably gone supersonic on that thing. So anyway, am I doing all right on time? Yeah, I'm doing good. So about that time, First Lady was notified that Barbara Olson was on Flight 77 that engaged the Pentagon, and she was a good friend of hers, worked for CNN and Fox, and she was the spouse of Ted Olson, who was the Solicitor General for the Department of Justice, and good friends with them. And of course, that was an emotional moment right away when now you start having some personal ties with some of the tragedy. So this is another one of those comical moments during the day. This is when I was called darling by the President of the United States. Doesn't happen very often, but we have a protocol when we engage a phone call. We would call up the White House Communications Agency operator and say, we want to initiate a call with the President on behalf of the First Lady. He's on Air Force One at the time, and so when they get him on the line, once they verify he's on the line, the next thing you hear is the operator will say, next voice you hear will be the President of the United States, and I'm supposed to say, next voice you hear is the First Lady of the United States, and we're supposed to kind of hand them off. I don't get that because it's all the excitement going on, and all I get is, hey, darling, how you doing? The next president, next voice you're going to hear is the First Lady of the United States, and he goes, oh. And I'm like, hey, I got called darling, and I walk dogs. You know, it was an easy day at work, right? But he didn't think that was real cute. He's a ribber. He likes to kid around a lot. Worst thing you could ever do is if he's ever giving a talk, is let your phone go off, and you'll get kicked out of the room real quick. Your phone's buzzing? See you later. You get kicked out of the room by the president. You're probably not going to cover him anymore if you're a reporter. So this is about that time. 2:50. He arrived in Offutt, and he was sitting. They took him down the bunker. They did some planning, and they said, "This is where you're going to stay for a little while." He says, "I'm not going to be down here in a bunker in Offutt, North Nebraska." So he said, "We're going home," and they made arrangements and got him home. So he returned to Washington D.C. later on that evening, and shortly after that, we connected up the First Lady and returned her back, and it was a nice little reunion down there in the basement, real quick. And he got to work right away with his national security advisors, and they began formulating a plan. One of the things that came out earlier in the day was Vice President Cheney said, "I want live footage of Ground Zero from overhead satellites right now. I want to be able to pull that in." And everybody just kind of looked at him dumbfounded. So we don't have that capability. What do you mean I don't have that capability? He said, "I want to look at it and see what it looks like right now." Well, you can't just redirect a satellite. You have to catch them when they're in that swath. You can turn them on and you can tune them a little bit, but you just can't say, "All right, we're going to turn that sucker like on Star Trek, and he's going to come back around and hit you." So right away it was like, all right, lessons learned. We need some more coverage. And then he wanted some footage. He wanted real-time footage of, or not real-time, but near real-time, what it looked like just minutes before the incident out there. So he wanted rollover imaging. He says, "Well, how much do you want? All of New York?" He says, "I want the world." So we built a server of the world after that. Lots of money was available after 9/11 that you didn't have when Secretary Hammer was saying, "Hey, we're putting all the kibosh on a lot of your funding." But I can tell you how much it costs and how many racks it takes to put the world in at 5-meter resolution. By the way, it was back then it was 5 terabytes for the world, but I think it's a little bit bigger now. Now that you can get a lot of that stuff that used to be classified at imagery resolution, now you're down to 5 feet resolution is nothing. Now it's inches that you can get in public sector. Huh? Yeah, and so Google for the $400 fee, you're getting 1 foot resolution, and you can even go down some of these other services for inches. Is that quarter on heads or tails? Is that a D quarter or is it a is that an S? So about that time, 8:30, he addressed the nation, as you know, from the White House, and that was kind of his posturing that, okay, I'm back in the seat, you're not going to run me off, and here's what's going to happen next, and you're going to pay for it. So he had a long day. He and the First Lady decided they're going to go upstairs to the residence and take a nap or go to sleep. And so they went down, and just after 10 o'clock is when they went to bed. And then one of the F-16s that was pulling air cap, covered sport for the White House, when he was pulling air cap, he was heading back to Andrews Air Force Base and had not checked in as he crossed a sector out there. And all of a sudden it sent up alarms. And they thought the White House was under attack, and they grabbed Secret Service, ran upstairs, shook the president awake, brought him downstairs. First Lady's wearing very nice nightgown with a robe over top with some fuzzy slippers. President's wearing some boxer shorts and this probably more red like your necklace right there T-shirt that's got moth holes all beaten up and eaten up on there. I'm thinking that's the President of the United States, and he's got a moth-eaten shirt. Awesome. So when I've got a little hole in my shirt, my wife's ready to throw away. And I was like, well, POTUS can run around with it. So that was that was the last moment of comedy that night. And then they realized, and they said, it was one of ours, and actually one of the Air Force guys who was working night watch in there said, hey, sir, no sweat. It's one of ours. And he was like, great, I got out of bed for this. And nobody really had a whole lot of sense of humor at that point of the day. But all in all, it was one of those emotional days that everybody kind of stepped out of their comfort zone and stepped out of their box, and was irrespective of what your role was in an environment like that. Somebody asked you to do something, you did it, and very commensurate to a lot of times when we run through emergency in our own environment out there. When you're a team player, you just kind of do what you're supposed to do. But with that, I know it's a little bit shorter than expected, but I'll offer it up, and I welcome questions about anything on that day or outside the realm of 9/11. Sir. So watching her comfort us, here we were, Ron Sprinkle, who was her deputy Secret Service lead, and Nick Trotta was her lead, and Bill Lang. We were all back in there trying to figure out how we were going to tell her that there wasn't a designated evacuation package to the same extreme that she was expecting, and she saw us struggling with that, and we're all in there huddling up, going, "Oh, dang!" It's kind of like pulling straws. You're gonna. You know it a little better than I do. And they knew her a lot better than me. Nick and Ron were with her every day, so they could, go up. I didn't see her every day. And she finally came out and just, confronted us and said, look, just tell me the truth. I can take it. This isn't kind of like, this isn't my first rodeo. She didn't say the exact words. I was like, oh, she's just very approachable, and watching her demeanor all day long, with the exception of when Barbara Olson, it was announced that she had died or was on the plane that hit the White House, or the Pentagon. She broke down then. But she was consoling, and when she had called her daughters earlier in the day and family, she was consoling everybody else, and she was a leader that day. Sir. I don't know that we'll ever know that. Lots of speculation, but no, not that I know of. No, they were at school, and they were taken to safe houses, upon the second attack when they started evacuating all the senior staff and family members. Yeah. Yeah, and so it was all over the map on National Archives. Hit the first monument or first National Archive or anything that really signifies history in Washington D.C. and in America. So, sir. Oh. Yeah, well, I learned how to build servers right away. That it was never in my realm. I mean, again, I was a computer crimes kind of guy, so I was always looking from a different perspective. And the guys who were building in the defense, I was looking from the perspective of forensics, CFE kind of background. And all of a sudden, I'm thrown in because I happen to have a technology title in my name, and because I'm in security, so well as a security. Protective security measure, we need to have the world at 1 meter. Well, some places you didn't even have that resolution, so there's a lot of disparate places out in the middle of nowhere that you don't have that. But learned what it took and how much bandwidth it took for the world at the time. But communications are key to anything. I mean, you can't accomplish any mission without communications, and communications were down. So there are a lot of dark communications now that we didn't have back then, and there's a whole lot of people who are believers in Iridium phones that shortly after that they were investing in Iridium phones. If you were in the Iridium business, I think you probably saw a spike in your customer base. Yeah, and yeah, so I mean, for me, a lot of it was planning. Kind of run through the, pardon my language, the all shit scenarios. Think about the things that are bad. If you run a data center, think about all the things that could run and cause mayhem. How many data centers have we read about in the last 6 months or year that have been shut down by squirrels? Yeah. Hey, you know what? Vegas just got hit 2 days ago. Did you see the flood that they have down there? They had a rain that hit like for 4 hours down in Las Vegas, out there towards University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And they got slammed. It was on the news the night before I flew. There were people standing out in front of their homes, and emergency relief was out there, and their houses were half underwater. I'm pretty sure they didn't have a flood plan out there. And so if you're in switch data centers down there in Las Vegas, I don't know how they are in that area. I don't know where they are in relation to that downtown Las Vegas area, but they were probably one who relooked their flood plans that they probably don't have. Sir. So in my role, my job was to go out and travel in advance, about a month and a half in front of the president, wherever he was going to travel to. If he was going to 3 stops in Europe, we would travel out there and work with host nation security, talk to those intelligence folks and work, what are the local threats that you have? We'd bring that together and pull that and sync it up with our intelligence and put together a threat package. That's for me, in working with Secret Service in a true protective role, an evacuation role. It was out of my box. It wasn't something that I had to do on a day-to-day basis. So I was winging it right along with it. A lot of it was being responsive to the leadership and addressing those questions and demands in a lot of cases the best you can, without without losing any more that we already had. Yeah, true. You're gonna wing it. You're gonna have to have that fallback plan every time, and sometimes it's best to just go straight to your fallback plan. I was actually in charge of 50 that day, and we have 50 on the lobby, and we never deviate from how it is. And the worst thing anybody wants to hear when they call somebody for assistance is not my job, right? You know, everything's your job when you're, I look at myself in a customer support role, right? I've got people in my data center relying on me to provide them space, power, and cooling and communications. Everything's my job if it means them getting a 0 and 1 pass through. So. Sir? Wow, that's a pretty good smoke and mirror story. We'll stick to it. No. In all seriousness, no. There are very, very methodical plans, and but. Yeah. Well. Yeah. So I think we're out of time, but thanks for your time and attention, and appreciate you listening to me. Thanks.